Last week, I told you all about my 1-year journey in renting this space for my studio. You can watch that here. And I thought it would be good to do a follow-up video giving you some alternative ideas between being on location and having a full studio space full-time for yourself. I do want to preface all of this with reiterating again, that you do not need a studio space to be considered a legitimate or professional photographer at all. And having an on-location business can be cheaper, and it's a custom experience every time for your clients. So don't think that you have to have a studio space to be a legitimate photographer. Okay, that said, the debate over whether to have a studio space or not is ongoing. And even just on YouTube this week alone, I saw one big YouTuber move out of a dedicated studio space into a home space, and another person excited to move out of their home space into a dedicated studio space. It really just needs to fit what you need and what fits your budget as well. Okay, so if you do want some alternative studio space ideas, I've got quite a few for you today. And by the way, Monique Renee here, a photographer sitting right here in Silver Paw Studio. And as you know, I help you tell all of your tales with a camera. And oftentimes with a camera, you are looking for a studio space. What I talked about in the last video, maybe there's weather concerns, or there's too many distractions on location, or your client doesn't have a location that you can use. Sometimes you need a space, maybe on a temporary basis. And so I've got a bunch of ideas here for you. Okay, this first one's gonna sound super weird, but number one is a yoga studio. And I've actually done this here in my town. This was a few years ago now. There was a yoga studio that was renting out by the hour for all kinds of different things. And they had a contract specifically for photographers. Now, I don't recall bringing a pet to that space, but if you're doing senior portraits or family, this would be an excellent choice. What was really great about this yoga studio, it was super cheap. It was like $20 an hour back a few years ago, just a few years ago. It had beautiful hardwood floors. It had a giant window, brick walls. It was gorgeous. And although I didn't use it much, it was nice to be able to tell my clients, listen, if we can't find an on-location space or your house doesn't work out, I have a space I can rent. And that always made my clients feel better, even if we almost never chose that option. Kind of along those lines is look for another event space. Think of wedding photographers. What are the venues that they use? And often they have beautiful halls, even if the location just has a foyer that's nice that you can rent maybe by the hour, the half day, or the day. A lot of wedding type venues have beautiful spaces. Actually, nice spaces inside and out. An example is I used to photograph an event every year at a golf course, which had a country club. And it was so beautiful there. I said, do you ever rent to photographers? And they're like, oh, sure. So not only could I have used their indoor spaces, which were pretty, I can also use the outdoor spaces, which were lovingly manscaped and had a beautiful view of the mountains. So think of different venues that either other photographers use or that you've been to that would make a nice space. Number three is group studio spaces. Now, most larger cities will have something like this. Generally, it's a large building that other photographers come and go from, and you can rent that by the hour, the half hour, or the day. Some of those even have separate studio spaces where there's a large space and some smaller spaces. Here in my town, there's a space that has a big white cyc wall. So that would be really good for large groups, for commercial projects, product photography, some video, although if you're doing video work, be cognizant of the noise around. That particular space is right on the train tracks, so you'll want the train schedule. But there are lots of kind of co-op, co-working type studios in a lot of cities. Number four sounds strange, but I've done this, is clubhouses. Now, clubhouses that I'm thinking of are in the middle of a neighborhood or a residential center, and they often will have these gorgeous clubhouses that all their residences can use for parties and events. And for instance, at the last apartments I lived at, we had a beautiful clubhouse with a large fireplace and a view out to the lake, and there was a conference room, and you can rent that by the day or the conference room by the hour. Okay, number 5 is a little strange, but I have to admit it was one of my big dreams probably 10 years ago, and it is a travel trailer. Yes, little known fact, Silver Paw Studio first came about, but the idea of a Silverstream or an Airstream trailer, I was big into camping in vintage trailer and trailer groups at that time, and I just thought it would be so pretty to refurb the back end of one of those and tow it around to different events and take pictures of 1 or 2 dogs at a time, or cats. So if you've got one of those just on your property or that you're refurbing, consider that. If you don't photograph big groups, what's great about being a pet photographer is you don't need a lot of height, which travel trailers don't have a lot of height. So a travel trailer could be actually a good option for you. Number 6, this option is a little bit more permanent, but it would be using a building that's already on your property, which would be maybe a shed or an outbuilding or a shop. You can set up that space to be a studio all the time, or you can rig it where as needed you go use that space. If you really needed an indoor space, prior to buying the house that we bought last year, that was one of our big goals, was to buy a piece of property that had an outbuilding or space to build a studio. That didn't happen for me. I've looked all over and there's no place that I can do that at the current home. But I've seen people make it work with just a shed on their property.
After seeing this photo in a photography Facebook group, I reached out to Emily to ask if I could share it with you. This is her childhood play shed at her mom's house that they have converted into a mini studio. Here you can see both ends where they have all of the props and supplies, and the other side is the shooting area. And you can almost see the dog right there. And here it is in use. You can see it's just big enough to have one good-sized dog. You could probably do some kitties in there or a little set of little dogs. And they photograph adoptable dogs here. Pretty cute. Thanks, Emily.
Number 7 is probably the one you hear about the most, and it's using a bay of your garage. And some people use this, again, temporarily, and then it goes back to being a garage when it's not being used as a studio, or you can set up a whole bay just for a studio. Again, this isn't going to work out for me because we have a 2-car garage. Half of it's all of the tools and woodworking, and half of it we're reserving for a future Tesla. So, a garage space, though, is really nice because oftentimes you have a door from the outside. It's kind of an empty slate, so you can set it up however you want. You could do this with a basement area too, especially if you have kind of a walkout basement or a place that people can come in that they don't have to necessarily go through your house. I even used my living room at one point because my living room in one of my homes was so large for some reason, and I didn't even use half of it. So rooms and spaces at your home too.
Here's some bonus pictures from Emily at Wags to Riches of her home studio space. This is at her home, again, where she photographs adoptable dogs. And you can see there's a big window. She has art on the wall and a area to actually work on the pictures. Another bonus that she sent me is how they organize their paper rolls. One is one of those wire shelves upside down, and the other is the clamps attached to a board. Go say hi to Emily and her mom on their Wags to Riches Facebook page. I'll put a link in the description as well. Thanks again, Emily.
Number 8 is gonna be super weird. But there's probably one in every single town, and I love, love, love using these as a temporary indoor studio space, especially in the wintertime. It's a greenhouse. Yes. Now, if you saw a couple of years ago, I filmed me doing Spring Me from the shelter sessions for a local shelter, and we used the garden center in our town, and they were so wonderful. They're already dog friendly. It's warm in there in the winter time. There's often beautiful light, and there's plants everywhere. it's kind of hard to go wrong with a greenhouse. So greenhouses, I've done business portraits in greenhouses, I've done family portraits, I've done events in greenhouses. Like, they're really nice spaces. So if you have a good relationship with a local greenhouse, or you know one that is dog friendly, if you're a pet photographer, a greenhouse is a nice space to use. Before I go into the last idea that I have, which is really good, so stick around, I want to talk just a little bit about considering having a studio at your home. Now, this is another thing that's been debated quite a bit among professional photographers. And I can tell you of a couple of famous photographers that I know of that started off at their home or still are. So Sue Bryce, if you know her, she is a portrait photographer and she started out of her garage, believe it or not. So she started in her garage. And then Kim Hartz, who is a famous dog photographer, her studio, last I checked, is attached to her home. So she's chosen to have her studio at her property, at her home. And so she's totally made that work. But things you want to consider before opening a studio at your home. First of all, I would say know how to set boundaries. You want to be able to tell people these are your office hours so they don't think they can just stop by any time to pick up orders or do any business. So be very good about setting all of your boundaries with your business. The second thing is, who else is living at your house? You might have family coming and going and a chaotic schedule that you'll have to work around. And consider the pets in your house. If you're a pet photographer and you have a dog that wants to meet every single dog that comes over, that could become an issue. So you'll need to really talk it over with your family and consider your pets as well. Obviously, you want to think about safety too. Everyone's going to know where you live. So if you have any misgivings about that, I suggest you don't have a studio at your home or only have people that you already have a relationship with over to your house. And of course, during COVID times, you have to especially consider safety issues. And if you're in PPA or in a professional photography association, oftentimes there are message boards and forums that you could talk this through with other people. And from reading it, most people they have a lot of concerns, but it ends up being okay. It's totally up to you. It has been done. It can be done. It just completely depends on how you want to run your business. Okay. With that out of the way, I want to tell you my 9th idea, which is pretty awesome. And it wasn't my idea, it was a friend of mine's idea. And this is to team up with another business. Now, in this case, this example that I'm thinking of, it's my friend Tara Patty down in Colorado Springs. When we both branched and had portrait photography separate than pet photography, she looked for a new space and she actually found one at her doggy daycare. So the place her dog was already going was pretty spacious and they had extra room. And so she approached them and said, hey, would you consider renting out part of your space here at the doggy daycare that I can rent for my photography studio? And it's worked out wonderfully. She saved on rent and she could be paired up with a company that already is dog friendly. So think about other businesses that you could potentially pair up with. One that comes to mind a lot is when you have a pet boutique and in the back there is a groomer. So there's a lot of ways that people already pair up. So if you know another pet-based business, maybe you know a dog trainer or a training facility or a barn or somewhere that you could pair up, and even if it's on a temporary, one-at-a-time basis, you can say, if I have a client that needs an indoor space, can I rent this space from you? But if you want to take it that next step, you could even potentially do what my friend Tara did and rent it on a permanent basis. Oh my gosh, so those are my nine examples for alternative studio spaces. I know a lot of people are on location, but they're not completely ready to commit to 100% having a studio. So these 9 options could be just what you need for an indoor space for your photography. Hey, remember to boop that like button and subscribe. If this is something that's interesting to you, even share it. Cool? All right, until next time, I wish you many woofs, purrs, and TREATSs.